Sense of urgency can be brought in rather than from an external stimulus of any kind, or you can initiate it from the inside in order to accomplish things that you don't intellectually know how to do. The cause is the willpower to force the situation on yourself, that inner sense of urgency. Every moment counts. And then things naturally happen. It's never the other way round. When you're training, there's often a tendency to plan everything beforehand. It's as if the idea that you must see something in order to act is completely dominant. However, what you can do instead is act before you see. So what I mean by this is that on some level you perceive what needs to happen rather than from an external stimulus of any kind, like someone launching a punch. You actually have that premonition or that sense of urgency to get switched on before that, so that it just happens automatically. It's not step one, the opponent puts his guard up, step two, I put mine, he attacks, or it's not step one, step two, step three, mechanically repeat. It's a case of you just know, you can bet your life on it, that you just know. You can call it an urgency to act or an intuitive sense to act. That's the appropriate word. So when that's technical ability, or knowing what to do in an altercation or a situation of urgency, we can have this intuitive sense of what to do, rather than having that, we can have that before the action needs to take place, before we see a visual stimulus. We can already have that embedded in us, so that we're prompted from within rather than waiting outside, because there's this idea that you need to see something in order to get switched on. Right, now I'm doing it. I need to have a trainer tell me this is what we're going to do, we're all going to do it, we're all going to learn it in this format, in this progression. But in fact, you already know what to do on the inner level, and that may bring it out in you, having that external stimulus, that external teaching. However, there's nothing that can teach that you don't already know. For instance, if I remember when I used to train with a club in Taekwondo, a number of instances where I couldn't do something and I would try and learn step by step. It just wouldn't happen. As soon as the pressure's on and I was doing sparring and the heat was on in that moment, I was suddenly able to do what I trained to do, but had failed. And I remember in one instance of competition, I was able to perform a spinning hook kick with my weaker leg. And I'd never done it before in training, but that became the basis of what I referred back to whenever I wanted to do it. So the sense of urgency can be brought into you from the outside, or you can initiate it from the inside in order to accomplish things that you don't intellectually know how to do. So this is a kind of energy awareness, an intuitive awareness, which isn't based on instruction. So instruction can help all this to some degree. So I'm not ruling out the importance of instruction, because it's obviously needed on the technical level. We have a cerebral capability which we should exploit. So theoretically, we want to know what to do, and we want to plan and all this kind of thing, and that's great. But it can't be relied upon to draw out that inspiration, because if you're training, for instance, at a club or whatever, there's only so many hours in the day when you can do that. So that's an hour, 2 hours a week or a day where you're extracting this awareness or this energy. But what about the rest of the hours in the day? Because when you need it, you can't rely on the training partners, however good they are, or the training techniques, if you need to pull it out the bag in that moment. So it's not a question of ruling that out, it's just a question of, can it be relied upon when you need it most, rather than as a thing that happens in the background, rather than something that you go to for knowledge, and then you apply it in any situation you choose. So once you've established this level of awareness, in my instance, during those hard training sessions, where it was forced out of me to perform things that, energy-wise, I wasn't capable of before, and the situation with the competition I was talking about, where I did the spinning hook kick, that I'd never been faced with the need to do that. All I'd done is practiced by rote, by step-by-step process. So in that moment I could do something that I'd never done, so the training could then inform that, work on it step by step, but it wasn't the cause. The cause is always within. The cause is the will, the willpower to force the situation on yourself, that inner sense of urgency, where every moment counts, however long that's for. If you can bring that sense of intensity to any activity, then with sustained practice, it will naturally happen anyway, what you're technically trying to do by rote. Now, obviously training technically for competitions and for people who aren't immersed in a situation of intensity, provides some intellectual satisfaction to be able to master techniques, and it's very impressive. There's a huge array of technical knowledge out there which is available at the click of a button. Whereas before, when I was training, you'd have to read a imported manual. If you could get your hands on it, you'd have to rely on the technical training only, once a week, twice a week, whatever it was. And not all of that was available, because you had boxing, I did taekwondo. There wasn't access to things like mixed martial arts, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, so this has provided a massive knowledge base which can be exploited, because we can apply this sense of urgency, this sense of intensity to training, whether you're by yourself or with anybody, so that you can master anything. This takes time, obviously. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not 1, step 2, step 3, I'm done. It's a gradual process of experiencing something within and then applying it outside, rather than experiencing outside and hoping that it sinks in. Because this takes a kind of mental attention to learn something theoretically that's quite exhausting. Whereas if you're looking to experience an intensity within, it's not necessarily of the brain, it's of the whole body and mind. so that it's at once invigorating as well as using up energy reserves to satisfy the needs to exert yourself and act in the world. So what I would say is to bring that level of intuitive practice, that dimension of intuitive practice to your training, because there are some situations which require people to be around, like when you're practicing your throws, when you're practicing your joint locks. It's widely held that this happens because you train with a partner only, but you can't train with a partner all the time unless you're extremely lucky. So one way, if you just practice escaping, you will find that in order to escape, you need to escape out of this gap if someone grabs the wrist. So you can practice at all angles. Escaping, you practice your grip at the same time as the escape. You'll find that you can apply pressure. Twisting helps. You'll find all these things in order to escape. And you'll find by doing so, all the empty hand techniques of the martial arts begin to make sense, because you have to perform them in order to actually escape. So the traditional arts are full of these exercises, but it's not widely known because the traditional arts tend to be more theoretical. They tend to be very technical. There's an exact way to hold the hand. But they never said that's the way you fight. Now, the Western way, the scientific way of the modern age is to take control over the process of combat, of applying the moves. So they're looking towards a goal, an end goal, in order to win a match, for instance. With the traditional arts, there was a control over the mechanics, but the process was not taken control of. It would just embed itself over time. So they never said, this is how you defend yourself. That's entirely up to you how you did that. And anyway, there are many ways of neutralizing attackers, which aren't practiced in the modern methods. For example, groin shots. In jiu-jitsu, for instance, you're not allowed to actually grab the fingers. Now, this is the major way to actually get someone off you, to manipulate the small joint, break the finger, because it's the weakest point. So taking that out of the equation forces you to use lots of different skills, arm locks, leg locks, things like that. But it takes away the fundamental small joint manipulation, which would be important in self-defense, because you want to get the guy off you as quick as possible. Go for the fingers. So this is an example of where competition can be good to learn technical exercises. However, as a sport, it's very good. But it forgets that there are certain maneuvers which are important to go over on a daily basis and remind yourself of, that are hidden in plain sight, like that. Because that would be the go-to move to unlock someone around your head, someone around your wrist, and all this sort of thing. So the traditional arts would normally say you practice in this way because if you hold your body in a certain way, this transmits the energy and restores health and all this kind of thing, and technically is correct. The process was up to you, how you fought. They would often fight people better than them because it would bring out that performance. Now, The modern way is often to predict the performance before it happens and align yourself with an appropriately matched opponent so that everything can be more predictable, even if the training is a lot more varied in terms of individual style and things like that, and not being so technical over the movements themselves. So where the traditional arts took control over the technical side, they never gave much thought to the process of training in such a way that it would predict the outcome. Whereas the modern way allows all sorts of technical faults and imperfections, but fundamentally aims at winning a contest where you're marginally better than the opponent. But the problem with that, if your opponent isn't particularly anything out of the ordinary, anything special, then you're just marginally better, or you don't know whether you're how much of an improvement you've made. In reality, you only check it against the opponent. So hopefully this has gone over some ideas about and reasons for practicing intuitively, because it brings a sense of aliveness to your training, so that although you might not do everything perfectly, with that will, with that intensity that you're bringing, constantly aware, never switching off from the energy of the body, it will automatically adapt itself over time so that the techniques happen anyway. You just need to bring the right intensity and the right intuitive energy, and just trust in that process, so that over time things happen according to your level, according to your commitment and responsibility to the process, rather than whether you're technically right and hoping that imbibes or embeds itself within you. So it's learning to embed these things rather than just learn them superficially and mindlessly. So it's a question of mindfulness. So taking responsibility for this process is always precedes mastery over the external movements, the external forms. This inner form always precedes mastery, because you need to take responsibility for that process rather than for someone else to do it. And then things naturally happen. It's never the other way round. So you look for the intensity of the experience, increase that awareness, and then when you've taken responsibility for that, it can't help but happen. It can't help but happen. Whether it's today, tomorrow, will all depend on your development, your work, a variety of factors which are out of your control, the external side. But fundamentally, taking responsibility and accepting that is a major step towards self-mastery and developing intuitive sense, which just happens rather than as a logical step-by-step process.